My name is Jessie Martinez, and I'm about to tell you how my own family stole everything I'd worked for while I was unconscious on an operating table. What started as a routine gallbladder surgery turned into the biggest betrayal of my 69 years on this earth. They thought a grandmother from small-town Ohio would be an easy target. They were dead wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. For 35 years, I ran Martinez Family Bakery on Main Street in Riverside, Ohio. I knew every customer by name, remembered their favorite pastries, and somehow always had fresh chocolate chip cookies ready when the school kids walked by after 3 o'clock. My late husband Carlos and I built that business from nothing, saving every penny, investing wisely, and treating our money like the precious resource it was. By the time I sold the bakery 2 years ago, I had accumulated nearly $400,000 in savings, investments, and retirement accounts. Money that was supposed to secure my golden years and provide something meaningful to leave behind for my family. I never imagined that same family would see my nest egg as their personal inheritance to claim early. The pain had been building for months before I finally admitted something was seriously wrong. Sharp stabbing sensations under my right ribs that would double me over while I was tending my garden or preparing dinner. At first, I blamed it on age, on lifting too many flour sacks during my bakery years, on anything except the possibility that my body was betraying me. Independence had always been my strong suit, and admitting I needed medical help felt like surrendering a piece of myself I wasn't ready to give up. Dr. Patricia Chen had been my physician for over a decade, one of the few people in Riverside who never treated me like a fragile old woman who couldn't understand her own medical situation. When she reviewed my ultrasound results that Thursday afternoon in late September, her expression told me everything I needed to know before she spoke a word. "Jessie, you have gallstones, and they're causing significant inflammation. We need to schedule surgery to remove your gallbladder before this becomes an emergency situation." Her voice carried the kind of gentle authority that made you trust her completely. "It's a routine procedure these days, laparoscopic surgery, minimal incision, quick recovery. You'll be back to terrorizing your garden weeds in no time." I appreciated her attempt at humor, but the word surgery still sent a chill through me. Carlos had gone into the hospital for what doctors called a routine procedure 8 years ago. He never came home. The rational part of my mind knew that gallbladder surgery was completely different from cardiac bypass, that medical technology had advanced significantly, that thousands of people had this operation every day without complications. But the widow part of my heart remembered sitting in sterile waiting rooms, remembered the look on a surgeon's face when things went wrong, remembered how quickly routine could become tragic. "How long will I be in the hospital?" I asked, already calculating which neighbors could water my plants and collect my mail. "Overnight observation, maybe 2 nights if we want to be cautious. You'll be home by the weekend." Dr. Chen made notes in my chart with the efficiency of someone who'd had this conversation hundreds of times. "Do you have family who can help with your recovery? Someone to drive you home, assist with groceries and household tasks for the first week or 2? The question hit a sore spot I'd been avoiding for months. My relationship with my son Robert had become increasingly strained since he'd married Amanda 3 years ago. Not because I disliked his wife exactly, but because something about their dynamic made me uncomfortable in ways I couldn't articulate. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Robert had always been a gentle soul, more interested in his art and his books than in practical matters like money or career advancement. Amanda, on the other hand, was ambitious, focused, and had very specific ideas about how life should be lived and what success should look like. "My son Robert lives in town with his wife Amanda. I'm sure they'll help." The words came out more confidently than I felt. The truth was, I hadn't spoken to Robert in over a month. Not since our last awkward dinner, where Amanda had spent the entire evening making pointed comments about the size of my house, the value of my neighborhood, and how wasteful it was for one person to have so much space when young families like theirs were struggling to get ahead. Dr. Chen scheduled the surgery for the following Tuesday, giving me 5 days to arrange my affairs and prepare for what I hoped would be a brief interruption to my carefully ordered life. Those 5 days would prove to be crucial in ways I never could have anticipated. The first call I made was to Robert, reaching him at the small graphic design studio where he worked creating advertisements for local businesses. His voice carried surprise and concern when I explained about the surgery, the kind of genuine worry that reminded me of the sweet boy he'd been before Amanda had started reshaping him into someone more ambitious and socially conscious. "Mom, why didn't you tell me you were having health problems? We could have helped, taken you to the doctor, been there for the appointments." His concern sounded authentic, and for a moment I felt guilty for not reaching out sooner. "It's just gallstones, honey. Nothing dramatic. But I'll need someone to pick me up from the hospital and maybe help with groceries for a week or so while I recover." "Of course, absolutely. Amanda and I will take care of everything. Don't worry about a thing." The eagerness in his voice was reassuring, though I caught something else underneath it that I couldn't quite identify. "Mom, have you updated your emergency contacts at the hospital? Made sure they have current information about your insurance and everything?" The question struck me as oddly specific, but I attributed it to his natural tendency to worry about details. "I'll take care of all that when I do my pre-admission paperwork. What about your bank information? Do they need account numbers for billing purposes, or should you handle that ahead of time?" Amanda's voice came from the background, apparently listening to our conversation. "The hospital handles insurance billing directly. I shouldn't need to provide bank account information for anything." I felt a small flicker of unease, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Robert's voice returned to the phone, warmer and more reassuring. "We just want to make sure everything goes smoothly, that you don't have to worry about paperwork and administrative stuff while you're recovering." Amanda's really good with that kind of organization. After ending the call, I spent the next few days putting my affairs in order with the methodical approach that had served me well throughout my life. I paid all my outstanding bills, arranged for mail hold, confirmed that my automatic payments for utilities and mortgage would continue without interruption. Most importantly, I gathered all my important documents and placed them in my home safe, a practice Carlos had instilled in me decades ago. My financial situation was more complex than most people realized. The proceeds from selling Martinez Family Bakery had been invested carefully across several accounts. My primary checking account at First National Bank of Riverside held about $15,000 for monthly expenses. My savings account contained another $50,000 for emergencies and major purchases. The bulk of my wealth, nearly $300,000, was split between a certificate of deposit account and an investment portfolio managed by a financial advisor in Columbus. I'd also established a small trust fund intended eventually for Robert, though he didn't know the specifics of its value or structure. The trust was designed to provide him with financial security without creating dependency, releasing funds gradually over several years rather than as a lump sum that might be squandered. Amanda had made several pointed comments about inheritance planning during family dinners, always framed as concern for my welfare and estate planning efficiency, but I'd deflected those conversations with vague reassurances that everything was properly arranged. Sunday evening, 2 days before my surgery, Robert and Amanda came for dinner. I'd prepared Robert's favorite meal, pot roast with potatoes and carrots, the same recipe I'd been making since he was a child. The conversation was lighter than our recent interactions, filled with stories about Robert's work projects and Amanda's promotion to senior sales associate at the real estate firm where she worked. "Mom, we've been thinking," Amanda said as we cleared the dinner dishes. "While you're recovering, it might be easier if you stayed with us for a few days instead of being alone here. We have that spare bedroom, and I could help with your medications and doctor's follow-up appointments." The offer was generous and practical, but something about it made me hesitate. "That's very thoughtful, but I'll be more comfortable recovering in my own space, with my own things around me." Dr. Chen said the recovery is pretty straightforward. But what if something goes wrong? What if you fall or have complications? Robert's concern seemed genuine, though I noticed Amanda nudging his arm under the table. "I have my medical alert pendant, and Mrs. Henderson next door checks on me every day. I'll be fine." I kept my voice light, not wanting to seem ungrateful for their concern. Amanda tried a different approach. "We're just worried about practical things. Like, what if you need to access your bank accounts for medical expenses or pharmacy costs? It might be smart to add Robert as a temporary authorized user, just in case you're too medicated to handle financial matters for a few days." The suggestion sent warning bells through my mind, though I couldn't articulate exactly why. My insurance covers the surgery costs, and I have enough in checking to handle any incidental expenses. I don't anticipate needing help with banking." "Of course not," Amanda said quickly, her smile bright and reassuring. "We're probably being overly cautious. It's just that when my grandmother had surgery last year, there were all sorts of unexpected costs and complications with insurance authorizations. We want to make sure you're protected." The conversation moved on to other topics, but I found myself studying Amanda more carefully as the evening progressed. There was something rehearsed about her comments, as if she'd planned specific points to raise during our visit. Her questions about my financial arrangements seemed more detailed than casual concern would warrant. Most unsettling was the way she kept steering Robert to ask follow-up questions, as if they'd discussed this beforehand. After they left, I sat in my living room reviewing the evening's conversation and trying to understand my growing unease. Amanda and Robert were family, and their offers of help were exactly what loving relatives should provide during a medical crisis. Yet something felt calculated about their approach, too organized and systematic for spontaneous concern. I decided to trust my instincts and take additional precautions. Monday morning, the day before my surgery, I visited First National Bank of Riverside and spoke with David Thompson, the branch manager who'd handled my accounts since Carlos and I had first opened them decades ago. "David, I'm having surgery tomorrow, and I want to make sure my accounts are secure while I'm recovering. I've heard stories about identity theft and fraud targeting people during medical procedures, and I'd rather be overly cautious." David nodded seriously. "That's smart thinking, Jessie. What kind of additional security measures would you like to implement? I want to place a temporary hold on any large withdrawals or transfers from my accounts. Nothing over $500 should be processed without verbal confirmation directly from me, and I want to be notified immediately of any attempt to access my accounts by anyone else. We can absolutely do that. I'll also add a note to your file requiring two-form identification for any in-person transactions." David made careful notes as we spoke. "How long do you want these restrictions to remain in place?" 2 weeks should be sufficient. I'll call you when I'm fully recovered and ready to return to normal banking operations." As David processed the security upgrades, he mentioned something that would prove crucial in the days ahead. "Jessie, we've also upgraded our fraud detection systems recently. Any unusual activity triggers automatic alerts to account holders via text message and email. Make sure we have your current contact information." I confirmed my phone number and email address, feeling satisfied that I'd taken reasonable precautions against any potential problems. The security measures felt like wearing a seatbelt, probably unnecessary but providing peace of mind for the small effort required. That afternoon, I received a call from Robert. "Mom, I wanted to confirm our plans for tomorrow. Amanda and I will be at the hospital during her surgery, and we'll drive you home when you're discharged." "That's wonderful, honey. I appreciate you both being there. Is there anything else we should know? Any special instructions from Dr. Chen? Or paperwork we should bring?" Again, his questions seemed unusually detailed, but I attributed it to nervousness about my medical procedure. "Just bring your patients. Hospital waiting rooms aren't known for their entertainment value." Robert laughed, and for a moment he sounded like the carefree young man he'd been before marriage and mortgage payments had added weight to his shoulders. "We love you, Mom. Everything's going to be fine." Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that made you want to stay in bed with a good book rather than report to a hospital for surgery. I arrived at Riverside General at 6 o'clock for preoperative procedures, my overnight bag packed with practical necessities and a few comfort items to make the sterile environment more bearable. The pre-admission process was thorough and efficient. Nurses confirmed my medical history, verified my insurance information, and reviewed post-operative care instructions. When they asked about emergency contacts, I provided Robert's name and phone number, noting that he and his wife would be my primary support system during recovery. "Mrs. Martinez, do you have any concerns or questions before we begin?" asked Nurse Michael Williams, a competent young man whose calm demeanor helped ease my pre-surgery anxiety. "Just the usual worry about general anesthesia. My husband had a bad reaction years ago, and it's made me nervous about being unconscious for medical procedures. Dr. Chen has reviewed your medical history thoroughly, and our anesthesiologist will monitor you constantly throughout the procedure. You're in excellent hands." His reassurance was professional, but genuine. Robert and Amanda arrived just as I was being prepared for surgery, both dressed nicely, as if this were an important social occasion, rather than a medical necessity. Amanda carried a large purse and a folder of what appeared to be paperwork, though I couldn't imagine what documents would be relevant to my gallbladder surgery. "How are you feeling, Mom?" Robert kissed my forehead with the gentle affection that reminded me why I loved him despite my growing concerns about his marriage. Ready to get this over with and move on with my life. I tried to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. Amanda positioned herself closer to my hospital bed, her voice carrying the kind of forced cheer that medical settings seem to inspire in people. "Jessie, we want you to know that Robert and I are prepared to handle anything that comes up while you're recovering. We've cleared our schedules, arranged for time off work, whatever you need." Something about her phrasing bothered me, but before I could analyze it further, the surgical team arrived to transport me to the operating room. The last thing I remembered was Dr. Chen's reassuring smile as the anesthesia took effect and the world faded to black. What I didn't know was that while I lay unconscious on the operating table, trusting my family to protect my interests and care for my welfare, Robert and Amanda were implementing a plan they'd been developing for months. A plan that would systematically drain my life savings and leave me financially devastated when I woke up. They had underestimated one crucial factor. This 69-year-old grandmother had learned a few things about survival and strategic thinking during 35 years of running a small business in a competitive market. And when I discovered what they'd done, I would show them exactly what those lessons had taught me about fighting back against people who mistake kindness for weakness. The surgery itself was successful, but the real battle was just beginning. I woke up in the recovery room with that distinctive hospital disorientation that comes from general anesthesia, where your brain takes several minutes to remember where you are and why everything feels cotton-wrapped and distant. The surgery had taken 3 hours according to the clock on the wall, though it felt like I'd been unconscious for minutes or possibly days. Dr. Chen appeared beside my bed with the satisfied expression of a surgeon whose work had gone exactly according to plan. "Everything went perfectly, Jessie. Your gallbladder was more inflamed than we expected, but we removed it cleanly with minimal complications. You should be feeling significantly better within a few days once the surgical soreness fades." She checked my vital signs with practiced efficiency. "Robert and Amanda have been waiting patiently. They're quite devoted to you." The comment about devotion struck me as oddly phrased, but anesthesia brain fog made it difficult to focus on subtleties. I was moved to a private room where I spent the next several hours drifting in and out of medicated sleep, vaguely aware of nurses checking on me and the steady beep of monitoring equipment that confirmed I was alive and recovering normally. Robert and Amanda visited that evening, both appearing relieved and attentive in ways that should have been comforting. Robert held my hand while Amanda fussed with my blankets and water pitcher, playing the role of concerned daughter-in-law with theatrical precision. "How are you feeling, Mom? Any pain or nausea?" Robert's concern seemed genuine, though I noticed Amanda watching my responses with unusual intensity. "Sore and tired, but grateful it's over. Dr. Chen says I can go home tomorrow if my recovery continues smoothly." I tried to sit up straighter, wanting to appear stronger than I felt. Amanda consulted a small notebook she'd been carrying. "I've been keeping track of your medications and the nurse's instructions. They want you to take the pain medicine every 4 hours for the first few days, even if you don't think you need it. I can help manage your schedule so you don't miss doses." The offer was practical and thoughtful, yet something about her detailed preparation bothered me. "I've been managing my own medications for 69 years, Amanda. I think I can handle a few pain pills." "Of course you can," she said quickly, her smile bright and untroubled. "I just want to help however possible." Robert and I have been discussing how to make your recovery as smooth as possible. They stayed for another hour, making small talk about neighborhood news and Robert's work projects. As visiting hours ended, Amanda mentioned something that would later prove significant, though at the time it seemed like casual conversation. "Jessie, I stopped by your house this afternoon to check on things, make sure everything was secure while you're here. I noticed some mail from your bank on the kitchen counter. Should I bring it to you tomorrow?" or would you prefer to handle it when you get home? The mention of bank mail sent a small alert through my foggy consciousness. What kind of mail from the bank? Just official-looking envelopes. Probably routine statements or notifications. Amanda's voice carried no particular emphasis, but something about her casual dismissal felt wrong. I'd like you to bring them tomorrow, please. And Amanda, how did you get into my house to check the mail? For just a moment, her composed expression flickered. Robert has your spare key, remember? From when we helped with your yard work last month. I didn't remember giving Robert a spare key, but anesthesia was making my memory unreliable. It seemed possible that I'd forgotten such a practical arrangement, especially if it had happened during a busy period of yard maintenance and family assistance. The next morning brought discharge paperwork and Dr. Chen's final instructions about activity restrictions and follow-up appointments. Robert arrived promptly at 10 o'clock to drive me home, his car equipped with extra pillows and a cooler of ice packs that Amanda had prepared for my comfort. "Where's Amanda today?" I asked as we pulled out of the hospital parking lot. "She had an important client meeting she couldn't reschedule, but she'll stop by this evening to check on you." Robert navigated the familiar streets of Riverside with careful attention, avoiding bumps and taking turns gently to minimize my discomfort. During the 20-minute drive home, I found myself studying Robert's profile and trying to reconcile the caring son beside me with the growing unease I'd been feeling about his marriage and financial situation. Robert had always been artistic rather than practical, someone who painted watercolors and read poetry instead of balancing checkbooks and planning for the future. It was one of the qualities I'd loved about him as a child, but I'd begun to worry that Amanda's more aggressive approach to financial planning might be pushing him toward decisions that compromised his natural gentleness. "Robert, can I ask you something directly? Are you and Amanda having money problems?" His hands tightened on the steering wheel, and he was quiet for several blocks before responding. "Why would you ask that?" "Because Amanda's been asking a lot of questions about my finances lately. Comments about inheritance planning, suggestions about managing my banking during recovery, interest in my estate arrangements. It feels like more than casual family concern. Mom, we're not having money problems exactly, but buying the house was more expensive than we anticipated, and Amanda's job market is competitive. She worries about financial security." His voice carried defensive undertones that suggested this was a sensitive topic. "If you need help, Robert, all you have to do is ask. We're family, there's no need for elaborate schemes or manipulative conversations." "I know that, Mom. Amanda just likes to plan ahead, to understand all the options available. She doesn't mean anything manipulative by her questions." We arrived at my house on Maple Street, a modest two-bedroom ranch that Carlos and I had bought 30 years ago, when property values made homeownership accessible to small business owners. Robert helped me settle into my favorite armchair with pillows arranged to support my surgical sites, then prepared lunch while I reviewed the stack of mail that had accumulated during my brief hospital stay. Most of it was routine correspondence, grocery store circulars, utility bills, and subscription renewals. But there were indeed several official envelopes from First National Bank of Riverside, which seemed unusual since I typically received monthly statements electronically and had no pending banking business. The first envelope contained a notification that struck me like a physical blow. It was a courtesy notice informing me that a large withdrawal had been processed from my savings account the previous day while I was in surgery. $50,000 had been transferred to an external account, leaving my emergency savings completely depleted. My hands shook as I opened the second envelope, which contained similar notification about my certificate of deposit account. Someone had initiated an early withdrawal penalty process to access another $100,000, claiming financial hardship and urgent medical expenses as justification for the premature liquidation. The third envelope was the most devastating. It was confirmation that my investment portfolio, managed by the Columbus financial firm, had been liquidated entirely based on written authorization claiming immediate need for medical treatment costs. Nearly $200,000 had been converted to cash and transferred to accounts I didn't recognize. In the span of 3 hours while I lay unconscious on an operating table, someone had systematically drained almost every dollar I'd accumulated over 35 years of hard work and careful saving. "Robert," I called toward the kitchen, my voice carrying a tremor I couldn't control. "Please come here immediately." He appeared in the doorway with a dish towel in his hands, his expression shifting from casual concern to alarm when he saw my face. "Mom, what's wrong? Are you in pain?" I held up the bank notifications, my hands still trembling with shock and rage. Someone has stolen nearly all of my money. While I was unconscious yesterday, someone with access to my accounts drained my savings, liquidated my investments, and emptied accounts it took me decades to build. Robert's face went completely pale, but something in his expression suggested this wasn't the first time he'd heard about these transactions. "Mom, that's impossible. Banks have security measures, authorization requirements. Someone can't just steal your money without your permission. Unless they have access to my personal information, copies of my identification, knowledge of my account numbers, and the ability to forge my signature on authorization documents." I studied his face carefully, watching for tells that might reveal his involvement. "We should call the bank immediately, report this as fraud, start the investigation process." His suggestions were appropriate and immediate, exactly what an innocent family member should recommend. "Yes, we should." I reached for my phone, then paused. "Robert, where exactly did you get the spare key to my house?" The question caught him off guard, and for several seconds he struggled to formulate an answer. You gave it to me last month when we helped with your yard work." "I've never given you a spare key, Robert. I'm very careful about home security, and I would remember such a significant decision." My voice carried the authority I'd once used to extract truth from evasive students. "Maybe Amanda arranged it with you. Sometimes she handles those kinds of practical details." His deflection confirmed my growing suspicion that Robert was involved in whatever had happened to my money. I called First National Bank immediately, reaching David Thompson despite the late hour. His voice carried shock and concern when I explained about the unauthorized transactions. "Jessie, this is exactly the kind of fraud we implemented security measures to prevent. According to our records, all of these transactions were authorized with proper identification and written documentation. Someone presented themselves as you, with identification and signed paperwork requesting these transfers. David, I was unconscious in surgery when these transactions occurred. I have medical records proving I couldn't have authorized anything yesterday. Then we're dealing with identity theft and fraudulent impersonation. I'm going to freeze all your remaining accounts immediately and start our fraud investigation process. You'll need to file a police report and provide documentation of your whereabouts during the time these transactions occurred." After ending the call with the bank, I sat in my armchair staring at Robert, who was pacing nervously around my living room. The evidence was pointing toward an inside job, someone with detailed knowledge of my financial arrangements and access to personal information that would enable them to impersonate me convincingly. "Robert, I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you know anything about these transactions? Has Amanda been discussing my financial accounts with you?" His pacing stopped abruptly, and for a long moment he stood with his back to me, shoulders tense with obvious internal conflict. When he finally turned around, his expression carried guilt and desperation in equal measure. "Mom, it's not what you think. Amanda didn't mean for this to happen." The partial confession confirmed my worst fears. What exactly did Amanda mean to happen? We thought that if you were temporarily incapacitated, it might be a good time to reorganize your finances more efficiently. Move money into higher yield accounts, consolidate your investments. Maybe set up some tax advantage structures that would benefit everyone. The explanation was so absurd that I almost laughed despite my anger. "Robert, you're describing theft and fraud as financial planning. Moving someone else's money without their permission is a crime, regardless of your intentions. But it's not stealing if we were planning to put it back, maybe even increase the value through better investment strategies." His voice carried the desperation of someone who knew his argument was illogical but couldn't abandon it. "Where is my money now, Robert?" His silence answered my question more clearly than words could have. The money was gone, probably spent on debts or purchases that couldn't be easily reversed. Amanda's financial reorganization had been a convenient story to justify theft, motivated by their own economic pressures. "I want you to leave now," I said quietly. I need time to think about this situation and decide how to proceed. Mom, please don't do anything hasty. We can work this out, find a solution that protects everyone. His pleading carried genuine panic, suggesting he was beginning to understand the legal consequences of what he and Amanda had done. The time for working things out was before you decided to steal from me while I was unconscious and vulnerable. I stood up carefully, my surgical sights protesting the movement, but my resolve absolutely firm. I want you gone, and I want my money returned immediately. Robert left without further argument, but not before I noticed him glancing toward my kitchen counter, where I kept important documents and mail. His departure felt temporary, strategic rather than defeated, suggesting he and Amanda were already planning their next move in whatever scheme they'd been implementing. Alone in my house for the first time since the surgery, I began to understand the full scope of what had happened to me. This wasn't a spontaneous crime of opportunity. Robert and Amanda had been planning this theft for weeks or possibly months, waiting for the right moment when I would be vulnerable and unable to interfere with their access to my accounts. They had used my medical emergency as cover for financial rape, trusting that my age and temporary incapacity would make me an easy victim who couldn't fight back effectively. They had fundamentally misunderstood who they were dealing with. I spent the rest of that afternoon making phone calls and gathering information about my legal options. The police report was filed by 5 o'clock, with Detective Sarah Rodriguez assigned to investigate the case. My attorney, Jessie Martinez, agreed to meet with me the following morning to discuss civil remedies and asset recovery options. Most importantly, I began documenting everything I could remember about Robert and Amanda's recent behavior, their questions about my finances, their access to my personal information, and their knowledge of my banking arrangements. The same organizational skills that had made Martinez Family Bakery successful would now be applied to destroying the people who had betrayed my trust and stolen my life savings. As evening approached, I received a text message from Amanda asking if she could stop by to check on my recovery. The audacity of her continued pretense of caring concern, after spending the day laundering my stolen money, was almost impressive in its shamelessness. I texted back, agreeing to the visit, curious to see how she would perform the role of devoted daughter-in-law while knowing what she had done. The evening's conversation would provide valuable insight into their strategy and help me plan my counterattack accordingly. Amanda arrived at 7 o'clock, carrying flowers and a casserole, the picture of family devotion. But I could see calculation behind her bright smile, the careful assessment of someone trying to determine how much I knew about their theft. The real battle was just beginning, and I intended to show them exactly what a lifetime of business experience had taught me about dealing with people who mistake kindness for weakness. Amanda knocked on my front door at exactly 7 o'clock, her timing so precise it suggested she'd been sitting in her car calculating the optimal moment for maximum emotional impact. Through the peephole, I could see her perfectly arranged appearance, holding a bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums and what appeared to be a homemade lasagna, the very picture of a caring daughter-in-law concerned about her recovering mother-in-law. I opened the door with a smile that matched hers in artificial warmth, both of us now playing roles in a drama where the stakes were far higher than she realized. "Jessie, how are you feeling? I've been worried about you all day." Her voice carried that particular tone people use when performing concern for an audience, though in this case the audience was just me. She bustled into my living room with practiced efficiency, arranging the flowers in my vase and heading toward the kitchen to store the casserole. "I'm recovering well, thank you, though I did have an interesting afternoon reviewing my mail." I settled back into my armchair, positioning myself where I could observe every micro-expression on her face when the conversation turned serious. Amanda paused in her flower arranging, her hands stilling for just a moment before resuming their task. "Oh? Anything important?" "Some correspondence from my bank. Quite urgent, actually." I kept my voice conversational, as if discussing routine household matters rather than life-altering theft. Banking can be so complicated, especially when you're recovering from surgery. It's probably just routine paperwork. She moved around my living room with the confidence of someone who felt completely in control of the situation. Actually, it was notification that someone had withdrawn nearly $400,000 from my accounts yesterday while I was unconscious. Quite a coincidence, don't you think? The flowers slipped from Amanda's hands, scattering yellow petals across my coffee table. For several seconds, the only sound in the room was the tick of Carlos's old grandfather clock in the corner. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its artificial cheer. "That's terrible, Jessie. Identity theft is becoming so common these days. You must be devastated." "I am devastated, but probably not for the reasons you think." I leaned forward slightly, studying her face as she scrambled to reassemble her composed mask. "The bank says the transactions were authorized with proper identification and written documentation. Someone who knew my account numbers, my personal information, and my signature well enough to convince multiple financial institutions." Amanda sat down heavily in the chair across from me, her performance finally beginning to crack under pressure. "Jessie, I can explain." "Please do." "I'm very interested in your explanation for how my life savings disappeared while I was having surgery." She was quiet for a long moment, and I could almost see her calculating different approaches, testing various stories in her mind before selecting the one she thought would be most effective. "Robert and I were trying to help you. Your money was just sitting in low-yield accounts, losing value to inflation. We thought if we could move it temporarily into higher return investments, we could actually increase your wealth while you were recovering." The explanation was so rehearsed it was almost insulting. "Amanda, taking someone else's money without their permission is called theft, regardless of your claimed intentions for improving their financial situation. But we weren't stealing it, we were investing it for your benefit." Her voice was gaining strength as she committed to her narrative. "Robert found these amazing investment opportunities, guaranteed returns that would have doubled your money within 6 months. What investment opportunities require $400,000 in cash and can't wait for the account owner to regain consciousness?" She shifted uncomfortably, clearly struggling to maintain her story in the face of logical questions. "Time-sensitive market opportunities. The kind of deals that disappear if you don't act immediately." "Amanda, where is my money right now?" The direct question shattered her composure completely. Her carefully constructed explanation collapsed, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw something resembling honesty in her expression. "It's complicated. Uncomplicated for me. Some of it went to pay off our mortgage early, which is actually an investment because it saves thousands in interest payments over time." Her voice was becoming defensive, aggressive. "Some went to Robert's business expansion, buying equipment and software that will increase his earning potential significantly. And the rest? There were some debts we needed to handle, credit cards and loans that were affecting our credit rating. By paying those off immediately, we improved our financial position, which benefits everyone in the family long term." The cold calculation behind her theft was breathtaking. They hadn't stolen my money impulsively or desperately. They had planned this systematically, viewing my life savings as their personal investment fund to be redistributed according to their priorities and financial goals. "Amanda, you stole nearly $400,000 from me while I was unconscious and defenseless. You used my medical emergency as an opportunity to commit crimes that will likely send you to prison for years. And you're trying to convince me this was somehow for my benefit? You don't understand the pressure we've been under," she said, abandoning her helpful investment story for an appeal to sympathy. "Robert's business has been struggling, my real estate commissions have been inconsistent, we're drowning in debt and falling behind on everything. When we found out about your surgery, it seemed like a sign, an opportunity to solve our problems and yours at the same time." "My problems? What problems did I have that required you to steal my money?" "You're alone, Jessie. You're getting older, your health is declining. You don't have anyone to help manage your finances or protect you from scammers and predators. We thought if we could consolidate your wealth into our household, we could provide better oversight and security." The paternalistic arrogance of her explanation was staggering. "So you decided to become the predators I needed protection from." Amanda stood up abruptly, pacing toward my window with agitated energy. "We're not predators, we're family. Everything we did was intended to benefit the whole family unit, including you. Everything you did was intended to solve your financial problems using my money. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this was about family welfare." "Fine," she said, turning back toward me with something closer to her authentic personality finally emerging. "Yes, we needed the money. Yes, we took it without asking. But Jessie, you have more money than you could spend in the rest of your lifetime." You live alone in this house, you don't travel, you don't buy expensive things, you just let hundreds of thousands of dollars sit in accounts earning minimal interest while your own son struggles to keep his business afloat. So you decided to redistribute my wealth according to your assessment of who deserved it more. We decided to be proactive about family financial planning instead of waiting around hoping you might eventually decide to help us voluntarily. Her voice was gaining strength and conviction, as if she was becoming convinced of the righteousness of her position. Robert was too proud to ask for help directly, but I could see you were never going to offer assistance unless we took initiative. Amanda, you could have asked for help. You could have explained your financial situation and requested a loan or gift. Instead, you chose to commit multiple felonies. And would you have helped? Really? Or would you have lectured us about fiscal responsibility and suggested we learn to live within our means? Her tone had shifted to open hostility, the mask of devoted daughter-in-law finally discarded completely. The question hung between us, and I realized this was the core of her resentment. Amanda had convinced herself that I was a wealthy miser who hoarded money while watching family members struggle, justifying her theft as correcting an injustice rather than committing a crime. You'll never know the answer to that question because you never gave me the opportunity to help voluntarily. You went directly to theft and fraud. Because asking for help would have required admitting failure, acknowledging that Robert's artistic dreams don't pay bills and my career isn't as successful as I pretended. For the first time, her voice carried genuine emotion rather than calculated performance. It was easier to take what we needed and rationalize it as family financial reorganization. Where did you learn to forge my signature, Amanda? The question caught her off guard, forcing her to confront the premeditation required for their scheme. Robert practiced it. He has samples from birthday cards and family documents over the years. How long have you been planning this theft? Since your last family dinner, when you mentioned having financial advisors and investment portfolios. We realized you had much more money than we'd understood, and we started discussing how unfair it was that you had so much while we had so little. How did you get access to my account numbers and personal information? Amanda looked toward my kitchen, where I kept important papers in a wooden organizer beside the telephone. Robert photographed documents when he was here helping with yard work. Account statements, investment reports, insurance papers. We needed to understand your complete financial picture before we could develop an implementation strategy. The systematic nature of their planning was becoming clear. This wasn't an impulsive crime of opportunity, but a carefully orchestrated campaign that had been developing for months. They had been using family visits to conduct reconnaissance, gathering the information they would need to impersonate me effectively when the right moment arose. Amanda, you do understand that what you've described is identity theft, forgery, fraud, and grand larceny. These are serious felonies that carry substantial prison sentences. We understand the legal technicalities, she said dismissively. But we also understand that prosecuting family members for financial misunderstandings creates more problems than it solves. Nobody wants to send their own son to prison over money issues that can be resolved through family discussion. Her confidence was astounding. She genuinely believed that family relationships would protect her from the consequences of her crimes, that my maternal love for Robert would prevent me from pursuing justice through the legal system. Amanda, you seem to think that being family exempts you from the laws that apply to everyone else. That's a dangerous misconception. What are you planning to do, Jessie? Call the police on your own son? Destroy Robert's life over money you didn't even need? Her voice carried a mixture of challenge and desperation. I'm planning to recover my stolen money and ensure that the people who robbed me face appropriate consequences for their actions. And then what? You'll be alone again? With no family, no support system, just your precious money to keep you company in your old age? Amanda was trying a different approach now, appealing to my fear of isolation and loneliness. I'd rather be alone with my integrity than surrounded by people who view me as a resource to be exploited when convenient. Robert loves you, Jessie. This situation has been tearing him apart. He knows what we did was wrong, but he felt trapped between his loyalty to you and his obligations to our marriage. If Robert felt trapped, he could have talked to me about it. He could have explained his financial pressures and asked for help like an adult instead of conspiring to rob me like a criminal. Amanda sat back down, her aggressive energy deflating, as she began to realize that her various emotional appeals weren't working. "What do you want from us? How can we fix this situation?" "I want my money returned immediately. Every dollar, with interest calculated from the date of theft. I want written admissions of guilt from both you and Robert. And I want assurance that you'll never again have access to my personal information or financial accounts." "That's impossible. We've already spent most of the money on debt payments and business investments. We can't just magic it back into existence." "Then you should have considered that consequence before you decided to steal it. Jessie, be reasonable. We can work out a payment plan, maybe transfer some of our assets to you as collateral. Find a solution that doesn't destroy Robert's life and marriage. The time for reasonable solutions was before you committed multiple felonies against me while I was unconscious and vulnerable." Amanda was quiet for several minutes, clearly struggling to develop a new strategy for managing the situation she'd created. When she finally spoke again, her voice carried a threatening undertone that revealed yet another aspect of her true character. "Jessie, you should think carefully about the consequences of pursuing this legally. Robert is your only family. If you send him to prison, you'll be completely alone. No one to help when your health declines further, no one to care about your welfare, no one to inherit your wealth when you die. Is your pride worth destroying your only family relationship?" The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Amanda was suggesting that my choice was between accepting their theft and maintaining some form of family connection, or pursuing justice and facing complete isolation in my remaining years. "Amanda, are you threatening me? I'm pointing out realities you might not have considered in your anger. Family relationships are irreplaceable. Money, even large amounts of money, is ultimately just numbers in accounts. Numbers in accounts that represent 35 years of my hard work and sacrifice. Numbers that were supposed to provide security and dignity in my final years. Numbers that you stole while I was unconscious and defenseless. And numbers that you can afford to lose more easily than Robert can afford to go to prison or lose his marriage." The conversation had revealed everything I needed to know about Amanda's character and the scope of their betrayal. She wasn't sorry about the theft, wasn't genuinely remorseful about violating my trust, and wasn't planning to return my money voluntarily. She was simply trying to manipulate me into accepting their crimes through a combination of family guilt and subtle threats. "I think this conversation has gone on long enough," I said, standing up carefully from my armchair. "I want you to leave my house now. Jessie, don't make a decision you'll regret. Family forgiveness is always possible, but legal consequences are permanent. The decision I regret is trusting you and Robert with access to my home and personal information. That's a mistake I won't repeat." Amanda gathered her purse and moved toward the door but paused to deliver one final attempt at manipulation. "I hope you realize that pursuing this legally will hurt you as much as it hurts us. Robert will never forgive you for sending him to prison, and you'll spend your remaining years knowing you chose money over family love. Robert should have thought about that before he chose to steal from me instead of talking to me like an adult." After Amanda left, I sat in my living room reviewing the evening's conversation and marveling at the depth of calculation and entitlement she'd revealed. She genuinely believed that family relationships should excuse criminal behavior, that my maternal love for Robert should override my right to justice and financial security. Most disturbing was her apparent belief that my age and isolation made me vulnerable to emotional manipulation, that threatening my family connections would force me to accept their theft rather than face loneliness in my final years. She had fundamentally misunderstood both my character and my priorities. 3 decades of running a small business had taught me that trust was the foundation of all relationships, that people who violate trust forfeit their right to continued association, and that accepting betrayal only encourages additional exploitation. Amanda and Robert had declared war on me the moment they decided to steal my money while I was unconscious. They had chosen to view me as a target rather than a family member, a resource to be exploited rather than a person deserving respect and consideration. Now they would learn what happened when someone with 3 decades of business experience decided to fight back against people who had seriously underestimated their opponent. The battle lines were drawn, and I intended to show them exactly what this grandmother was capable of when her family betrayed her trust and stole her life savings. The real war was just beginning, and I had every intention of winning it completely. The morning after Amanda's visit brought crystal-clear October weather and an equally clear sense of purpose. I had spent most of the night awake, not from surgical pain, but from the adrenaline of finally understanding the full scope of what Robert and Amanda had done to me. Sleep had been impossible, while my mind cataloged evidence, planned strategies, and prepared for the war they had unknowingly declared. By 7 o'clock, I was dressed and ready for what would prove to be the most important day of my 70-year life. My first call was to Detective Sarah Rodriguez, who had been assigned to my case and was expecting to hear from me with additional information about the theft. Detective Rodriguez, this is Jessie Martinez. I have significant developments in my identity theft case that we need to discuss immediately. Mrs. Martinez, I was planning to call you this morning. We've been reviewing the bank security footage and documentation from the fraudulent transactions. Can you come to the station this morning to review what we've found? I can be there within the hour, but Detective, I need you to know that this wasn't random identity theft. This was done by my son and daughter-in-law, and I have recorded evidence of their confession. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds before Detective Rodriguez responded. Mrs. Martinez, that's a very serious allegation. Family fraud cases require extremely careful handling. What kind of recorded evidence do you have? A complete confession from my daughter-in-law admitting to the theft, explaining their methods, and detailing how they gained access to my personal information. She recorded the conversation herself, thinking it would protect her legally. I was stretching the truth slightly about the recording, but my phone had been set to voice memo mode throughout Amanda's visit, capturing every word of her increasingly desperate explanations and threats. The recording quality was excellent, and her admissions were clear and unambiguous. I'll see you at 9 o'clock. Bring everything you have, and Mrs. Martinez, don't discuss this case with anyone else until we've had a chance to review all the evidence together. My second call was to Lisa Martinez, my attorney, who had been a friend since her parents had been regular customers at our bakery during her childhood. Lisa had built a successful practice specializing in elder law and financial crimes, making her perfectly qualified to handle both the criminal and civil aspects of my case. Lisa, it's Jessie. I need to accelerate our timeline significantly. Robert and Amanda have admitted to stealing my money, and I have recorded evidence of their confession. We need to move quickly before they have time to hide assets or develop more sophisticated legal defenses. Jessie, slow down and tell me exactly what happened. Are you saying they confessed to the theft? I played portions of the recording for Lisa over the phone, watching her professional demeanor shift from polite concern to focused intensity as she heard Amanda's increasingly desperate attempts to justify the theft. This is a prosecutor's dream case, Lisa said when the recording ended. Clear confession, detailed admission of methods, explicit acknowledgement that they knew their actions were illegal. How did you manage to get her to confess so completely? I let her think she could manipulate me into accepting the theft through family guilt and emotional pressure. She got overconfident and said much more than she intended. Jessie, this recording could result in serious prison time for both Robert and Amanda. Are you prepared for that reality? The question forced me to confront the emotional complexity of pursuing justice against my own son. Part of me still loved Robert and wanted to protect him from the consequences of his choices. But the larger part of me understood that accepting their theft would only enable future exploitation and send the message that family relationships excuse criminal behavior. I'm prepared for whatever consequences are necessary to recover my money and ensure this never happens again. Then we need to coordinate with the police investigation and file civil suits immediately to freeze any remaining assets before they can be hidden or transferred. I'll meet you at the police station at 9 to make sure your rights are protected throughout this process. The Riverside Police Department occupied a modest brick building on Main Street, 3 blocks from where Martinez Family Bakery had operated for over 3 decades. Detective Rodriguez was waiting in a small conference room with several thick folders and a laptop computer displaying what appeared to be bank security footage. Mrs. Martinez, thank you for coming in so promptly. Before we discuss your recorded evidence, I want to show you what our investigation has uncovered. She turned the laptop screen toward me, revealing security camera footage from First National Bank of Riverside. The timestamp showed Tuesday at 11:47 a.m., approximately 90 minutes into my surgery. The footage showed Amanda entering the bank with a large folder of documents, approaching the customer service counter with the confident demeanor of someone conducting routine business. Your daughter-in-law presented herself as you, using a fake ID that matched your account information perfectly. She had copies of your driver's license, social security card, and birth certificate, along with forged power of attorney documents claiming emergency medical authorization to access your accounts. I watched Amanda's performance with horrified fascination. She had studied my mannerisms well enough to mimic my speech patterns and body language convincingly. The bank teller, someone I'd known for years, appeared to accept her impersonation without question. How did she get copies of my identification documents? She told the bank manager that you had provided them in anticipation of potential medical emergencies, and that you had specifically authorized her to handle financial matters if you became incapacitated during surgery. Detective Rodriguez advanced the footage to show Amanda signing withdrawal forms with what appeared to be my signature. This level of preparation suggests months of planning. The forged documents are extremely sophisticated, probably created by someone with professional graphic design skills. The reference to graphic design skills made my stomach clench, as I realized Robert's artistic talents had been used to create the forged documents that enabled their theft. My son hadn't just participated in stealing my money. He had used his professional abilities to make the theft possible. Detective, I have the recorded confession that explains how they planned and executed this theft. I played Amanda's admission for Detective Rodriguez and Lisa, watching both women take careful notes as the recording revealed the scope of Robert and Amanda's conspiracy. Mrs. Martinez, this recording provides crucial evidence for our criminal case, but I need to ask some difficult questions about your intentions regarding prosecution. What do you mean? Family fraud cases often get complicated when victims are reluctant to pursue charges against relatives. Are you prepared to testify against your son and daughter-in-law in criminal court, knowing they could face significant prison sentences? The question forced me to confront the emotional reality of what I was setting in motion. Robert could face 5 to 10 years in prison for his role in the theft. Amanda, as the primary architect of the scheme, could face even longer sentences for multiple felonies, including identity theft, forgery, and grand larceny. Detective, if I don't pursue charges, what message does that send to other criminals who target elderly victims? What precedent does it set for family members who view their relatives as resources to be exploited? It sends exactly the wrong message, Lisa interjected. Elder financial abuse is a serious crime that destroys lives and families. Prosecuting these cases fully is the only way to deter future crimes and protect other vulnerable victims. Detective Rodriguez nodded approvingly. We've been building a strong case against organized financial exploitation networks that target seniors. Your willingness to pursue charges could help us establish legal precedents that protect other elderly victims from similar crimes. Then we proceed with full prosecution. I want Robert and Amanda to face every possible charge that applies to their actions. Mrs. Martinez, I need to prepare you for what's going to happen next. We'll be obtaining arrest warrants for both Robert and Amanda, probably executing them within the next 48 hours. This will become public knowledge very quickly in a town the size of Riverside. The prospect of my son being arrested and charged with stealing from his own mother would undoubtedly become major local news. The story would spread through Riverside's small-town network within hours, making me the subject of gossip, sympathy, and probably some criticism for pursuing charges against family members. I understand the social consequences, Detective. I'm prepared to deal with them. There's one more thing. Based on the sophistication of their operation and the amounts involved, we suspect this might not be their first victim. We're going to investigate whether Robert and Amanda have targeted other elderly individuals with similar schemes. The possibility that my son and daughter-in-law were serial predators who had victimized other seniors sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the autumn weather. If they had stolen from other elderly victims, my prosecution might help those people recover their losses and find closure. Whatever you need from me to support a broader investigation, I'll provide. Lisa and I spent the next 2 hours at the police station, providing detailed statements and reviewing evidence that would support both criminal charges and civil asset recovery actions. The scope of Robert and Amanda's theft was even more extensive than I had initially realized. "Jessie, they didn't just steal your liquid assets," Lisa explained as we reviewed financial records. "They also attempted to transfer ownership of your house by filing fraudulent quitclaim deeds. If the county recorder's office hadn't flagged the suspicious timing and requested additional verification, you could have lost your home as well." The revelation that they had tried to steal my house was somehow more shocking than the monetary theft. Carlos and I had bought our home 30 years ago, raised Robert there, created decades of memories within its walls. The idea that he would try to steal the roof over my head while I was unconscious in surgery represented a level of betrayal that went beyond financial crime into something approaching pure evil. How much of my stolen money can we recover? That depends on how quickly they spent it, and whether they tried to hide assets in accounts we can't trace. Based on the bank records, they paid off approximately $70,000 in credit card debt, made a $40,000 down payment on a new car, and transferred nearly $200,000 to investment accounts in both their names. So the money still exists, just in their possession instead of mine. Most of it, yes. The car purchase will be harder to recover since vehicles depreciate rapidly, but the investment accounts can be frozen and returned to you through court order. We should be able to recover at least $300,000 of the $400,000 they stole. The prospect of recovering most of my stolen money was enormously relieving, though the emotional and legal costs of pursuing justice would be substantial. Fighting family members in court would likely destroy any possibility of future relationships with Robert, but maintaining those relationships after such betrayal seemed impossible anyway. "Lisa, I want to pursue every possible legal remedy. Criminal charges, civil suits, asset recovery, whatever it takes to make this right. Jessie, I need to warn you that Robert and Amanda will probably hire aggressive defense attorneys who will try to portray you as a vengeful elderly woman destroying her family over money. They'll argue that this was a misunderstanding between family members that got blown out of proportion. Let them try. I have recorded confessions, bank security footage, and documentation of systematic planning that lasted months. The evidence speaks for itself. My confidence was genuine, though I understood that legal battles could be unpredictable. Criminal cases required proof beyond reasonable doubt, and defense attorneys were skilled at creating doubt even when evidence seemed overwhelming. Civil cases required proof by preponderance of evidence, a lower standard but still demanding careful documentation and presentation. The key advantage we have is Amanda's recorded confession. She admitted to virtually every element of the crimes in her own words. Even the most skilled defense attorney will have difficulty explaining away such clear admissions of guilt. As we left the police station, Lisa outlined the timeline for the legal proceedings ahead. Criminal charges will be filed tomorrow, with arrests probably happening this weekend. The arraignment will be next week, followed by preliminary hearings and plea negotiations. The civil suits will be filed simultaneously to freeze their assets and begin recovery proceedings. How long before this is resolved? Criminal cases typically take 6 to 12 months, depending on whether they accept plea bargains or demand jury trials. Civil asset recovery could be faster if they cooperate, but if they fight every step of the process, it could take years. The prospect of years of legal battles was exhausting to contemplate, but the alternative of accepting their theft and enabling future exploitation was unacceptable. Robert and Amanda had made their choices when they decided to steal from me while I was unconscious and vulnerable. Now they would face the consequences of those choices through the justice system. That evening I sat in my living room reviewing the events of the day and preparing for what would undoubtedly be the most difficult period of my life. Tomorrow would bring arrest warrants and public exposure of my family's betrayal. Next week would bring court appearances and legal proceedings that would dominate my life for months. But tonight, for the first time since discovering the theft, I felt something approaching peace. I had taken decisive action to protect myself and recover my stolen money. I had refused to be manipulated by family guilt or threats of isolation. I had chosen justice over convenience, principle over false harmony. The phone rang at 8 o'clock, Robert's name appearing on the caller ID. I let it go to voicemail, curious about what he might say now that Amanda had surely told him about our confrontational conversation. His message was brief but revealing. "Mom, Amanda told me about your conversation last night. We need to talk before you do something we'll all regret. What happened can be worked out within the family if you're willing to be reasonable. Please call me back before you make any decisions you can't undo." The message confirmed that Robert still didn't understand the gravity of what they had done or the determination with which I intended to pursue justice. He was still thinking in terms of family negotiation and compromise, not criminal prosecution and asset recovery. I didn't return his call. The time for family discussion had ended when they chose theft over honesty, exploitation over communication. Now the courts would handle the resolution of their crimes, and justice would determine the consequences of their choices. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of the legal battle that would define the final chapter of my relationship with my son. But tonight I felt the satisfaction of someone who had refused to be victimized, who had fought back against betrayal with intelligence and determination. Robert and Amanda had seriously underestimated the grandmother they had chosen to rob. They were about to learn exactly what 35 years of business experience and 70 years of life had taught me about fighting for what was mine. The arrests happened on a crisp Saturday morning in late October, exactly 1 week after my surgery, and 5 days after Amanda's confession in my living room. I watched from my kitchen window as 2 police cruisers pulled into Robert's driveway 3 blocks away, their red and blue lights creating a silent light show that would soon become the talk of Riverside's entire neighborhood network. Detective Rodriguez had called me 20 minutes earlier to let me know the warrants were being executed, partly as a courtesy, and partly to ensure I was prepared for the inevitable phone calls and media attention that would follow. Small-town arrests for major financial crimes always generated significant interest, especially when they involved family members and elderly victims. I had chosen to watch from a distance, rather than be present for Robert's arrest, not out of cowardice but because I wanted to see his authentic reaction without my presence influencing his behavior. Through binoculars I'd borrowed from my neighbor Mrs. Henderson, I could see Robert emerge from his house in handcuffs, his face displaying shock and disbelief that suggested he had genuinely believed family connections would protect him from legal consequences. Amanda's arrest was more dramatic. She resisted physically, shouting about prosecutorial overreach and family persecution loud enough that neighbors throughout the block emerged from their homes to witness the spectacle. Her performance confirmed everything I had learned about her character during our confrontational conversation, revealing someone who viewed herself as a victim, even while being arrested for crimes she had openly confessed to committing. The local newspaper photographer arrived just as Amanda was being placed in the police cruiser, ensuring that her arrest would be front-page news in the next edition of the Riverside Weekly Herald. The headline would read, "Local couple arrested for elder financial abuse, making their crimes public knowledge throughout our small community." My phone began ringing within an hour of the arrests, starting with neighbors who had witnessed the police activity and progressing to reporters seeking interviews about the case. I declined all media requests on advice from Lisa, who wanted to control the narrative through official legal channels, rather than public statements that could complicate prosecution efforts. The most difficult call came from Robert himself, speaking from the county jail where he was being held pending arraignment. His voice carried a combination of desperation and anger that I had never heard before, revealing emotional depths I hadn't known existed in my gentle, artistic son. "Mom, how could you do this to me? I'm your son. I'm sitting in jail because you chose to press charges instead of working this out as a family." His voice cracked with emotion that sounded genuine, though I had learned not to trust my instincts about Robert's sincerity. "Robert, you're sitting in jail because you chose to steal from me while I was unconscious and vulnerable. Your arrest is the consequence of your actions, not mine. But I never meant to hurt you. We were trying to help, to improve your financial situation, while solving our problems at the same time. It wasn't supposed to be permanent theft. Robert, taking someone's money without permission is theft regardless of your intentions or timeline for returning it. The fact that you plan to eventually give some of it back doesn't change the criminality of your actions. Mom, please, I'm begging you to drop the charges. I'll do anything to make this right, pay back every penny, work out a payment plan, whatever you want. But please don't send me to prison over money mistakes." The conversation was perhaps the most emotionally difficult moment of the entire ordeal. Despite everything Robert had done, hearing him beg for mercy activated every maternal instinct I possessed. The temptation to protect my child from consequences, even consequences he had earned through criminal behavior, was almost overwhelming. Robert, the time for making this right was before you decided to forge my signature and steal my life savings. You and Amanda made choices that led inevitably to this moment. You're destroying our lives over money, Mom. Is your bank account really more important than your relationship with your only child? The question revealed the fundamental misunderstanding that had enabled Robert and Amanda's crimes. They viewed my pursuit of justice as choosing money over family, when in reality I was choosing principles over manipulation, integrity over enabling criminal behavior. I'm not destroying your life over money, Robert. I'm refusing to accept criminal victimization by people who happen to be related to me. If you and Amanda had robbed a stranger instead of your mother, would you expect that stranger to drop charges because sending you to prison would be inconvenient? That's different. We're family. Families should protect each other, forgive mistakes, work together to solve problems. Families should also trust each other, communicate honestly, and ask for help instead of committing crimes. You and Amanda violated every principle of family loyalty when you chose to steal from me. The conversation ended with Robert hanging up in frustration, though he would call several more times over the following weeks, with increasingly desperate appeals for mercy. Each conversation reinforced my conviction that pursuing full prosecution was the right decision, as Robert seemed incapable of accepting responsibility for his actions or acknowledging the seriousness of his crimes. The legal proceedings moved forward with efficiency that surprised everyone involved. Amanda's recorded confession made plea negotiations almost inevitable, as her defense attorney advised accepting responsibility rather than fighting evidence that was overwhelming and unambiguous. 3 weeks after the arrests, both Robert and Amanda accepted plea bargains that would spare them the uncertainty of jury trials in exchange for guaranteed prison sentences. Amanda received 4 years in state prison plus restitution orders for the full amount stolen. Robert received 2 years plus community service, his lighter sentence reflecting his secondary role in planning the crimes. The restitution orders required them to immediately surrender all assets purchased with my stolen money, including the new car, the investment accounts, and partial ownership of their house. The court-ordered asset seizures recovered approximately $350,000 of the $400,000 they had stolen, leaving me with a $50,000 loss that represented the money they had spent on debt payments and living expenses. Lisa successfully argued for additional punitive damages in civil court, ultimately recovering the remaining $50,000 plus interest and legal fees from Robert and Amanda's remaining personal assets. The complete financial recovery took 8 months, but by the following summer I had recovered every dollar they had stolen, plus compensation for my legal costs and emotional distress. More satisfying than the financial recovery was the precedent the case established for prosecuting family financial crimes. Detective Rodriguez later told me that my willingness to pursue full prosecution had encouraged 3 other elderly victims to come forward with similar cases against family members who had exploited their trust and stolen their money. The case also revealed that Robert and Amanda had indeed targeted other victims before me. During the investigation, police discovered that they had used similar techniques to steal approximately $20,000 from Amanda's elderly aunt, convincing her to provide access to her accounts for alleged investment opportunities that never materialized. The revelation that my son and daughter-in-law were serial predators who had made a practice of exploiting elderly relatives removed any remaining doubts about the appropriateness of my decision to prosecute them fully. They weren't desperate family members who had made a single bad decision. They were criminals who had developed systematic methods for targeting vulnerable seniors. Amanda served her full 4-year sentence without parole, using her time in prison to earn a business degree through correspondence courses. Upon her release, she moved to another state and reportedly started a legitimate career in financial planning, though I often wondered whether her training in manipulation and fraud would resurface in her new profession. Robert served 18 months of his 2-year sentence before being released on good behavior, a development that filled me with complex emotions I struggled to process. Part of me hoped his prison experience had taught him valuable lessons about consequences and responsibility. Another part of me worried that he would emerge bitter and resentful, blaming me for his incarceration rather than accepting responsibility for his crimes. He did not contact me upon his release, and I made no effort to reach out to him. The relationship between us had been irreparably damaged by his betrayal and his continued inability to accept responsibility for his actions. While I still loved the memory of the boy he had been, I could no longer trust or respect the man he had become. The house they had tried to steal from me through fraudulent deed transfers was eventually sold to pay their legal debts and restitution obligations. I drove past it occasionally during the months following their arrests, noting how quickly it had fallen into disrepair without proper maintenance, a physical manifestation of how their criminal lifestyle had corrupted everything they touched. My own recovery from the trauma took longer than the physical healing from gallbladder surgery. The emotional impact of being betrayed by my only child created wounds that couldn't be addressed through legal proceedings or financial restitution. I sought counseling from a therapist who specialized in elder abuse trauma, learning strategies for processing the complex grief that comes with losing family relationships to criminal behavior. The counseling helped me understand that my decision to prosecute Robert and Amanda had been not only legally justified, but psychologically necessary for my own healing. Accepting their theft would have required me to abandon my principles and enable future exploitation, creating a pattern of victimization that could have continued indefinitely. More importantly, the counseling helped me recognize that pursuing justice didn't make me a vindictive person who chose money over family. It made me someone who refused to accept criminal victimization regardless of who committed the crimes, someone who valued principles over convenience and integrity over false harmony. The story of my case spread beyond Riverside through elder advocacy networks and legal professionals who used it as an example of successful prosecution of family financial crimes. I was invited to speak at conferences about elder abuse prevention, sharing my experience with audiences of law enforcement officers, social workers, and legal professionals who worked with elderly victims. These speaking engagements became an unexpected source of purpose during my recovery, allowing me to transform my traumatic experience into educational tools that might help other seniors recognize and respond to financial exploitation. The presentations were emotionally challenging but ultimately healing, providing a sense that my suffering had served a larger purpose in protecting other vulnerable adults. The financial security I had worked 35 years to build was ultimately preserved through my willingness to fight for it, but the family relationships I had hoped to enjoy during my retirement were permanently lost. The trade-off was painful but necessary, as maintaining those relationships would have required accepting criminal victimization and enabling future exploitation. 2 years after the arrests, I received an unexpected letter from Robert, written from his apartment in Columbus, where he had moved after his release from prison. The letter was brief and carefully worded, apparently composed with legal advice to avoid admitting additional guilt while expressing some form of remorse. "Mom, I know I can never undo the harm I caused you or repair the trust I destroyed. I think about our situation every day and wish I had made different choices 2 years ago. I hope you're healthy and finding peace in your life. I will understand if you prefer not to respond to this letter." I read the letter multiple times, analyzing every word for signs of genuine remorse or continued manipulation. Ultimately, I concluded that Robert's motivations didn't matter as much as my own boundaries and emotional health. I had built a new life without him, found purpose in helping other elder abuse victims, and established relationships with neighbors and friends who respected my dignity and autonomy. I didn't respond to his letter, though I kept it in case future communication became necessary for legal reasons. The door to reconciliation wasn't permanently closed, but it would require much more than a carefully worded letter to rebuild trust that had been so completely shattered by theft and betrayal. My 71st birthday arrived quietly, celebrated with friends from my church and neighbors who had supported me throughout the legal proceedings. The day was peaceful and satisfying in ways that family celebrations had never been, free from the underlying tensions and manipulation that had characterized my relationship with Robert and Amanda. As I reflected on the 2 years since my surgery and the theft that followed, I realized that losing my son and daughter-in-law to criminal prosecution had been less devastating than I had feared. The relationships I had mourned were based on false foundations of trust and respect that had never actually existed. Robert and Amanda had viewed me as a resource to be exploited rather than a person deserving consideration. making genuine relationships impossible regardless of legal proceedings. The grandmother they had chosen to rob while she was unconscious and vulnerable had proven to be much stronger and more determined than they had anticipated. They had expected easy manipulation through family guilt and emotional pressure, but instead had encountered someone with the business experience and personal integrity necessary to fight back effectively against criminal exploitation. My money was recovered, my principles were preserved, and my dignity was intact. Robert and Amanda had learned that family relationships don't excuse criminal behavior, that theft has consequences regardless of the perpetrator's relationship to the victim, and that underestimating elderly victims can be a costly mistake. Most importantly, other seniors had been protected through the precedent my case established for prosecuting family financial crimes. The grandmother who had been targeted for victimization had instead become an advocate for elderly victims, transforming her trauma into tools for education and prevention. They had tried to empty my bank account while I was in surgery, but instead I had emptied their future prospects, ensuring that their criminal choices would follow them for years through prison sentences, criminal records, and the knowledge that their crimes had been exposed and punished rather than hidden and enabled. Justice had been served, and I had survived with my integrity and independence intact. The battle was won, and this grandmother had proven that experience and determination could triumph over youth and manipulation when principles mattered more than family harmony. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.